Okay, so I'm going to be talking about what your cows need in terms of what is actually out there. Everyone can hear me? Good. Okay, so we're going to talk about the rules first. The rules of cows are their nutrients, whether it be minerals or protein or energy, is going to go to their maintenance first. So whatever they have just to sustain themselves, that's their maintenance. Above that, they're going to put their nutrition or their nutrients into lactation. Next is growth. If they need to grow, if they're under body condition or if they're a heifer and they're still growing, they're going to put their nutrients towards that. And the last thing that they put their nutrients towards is breeding, which is, of course, quite important. And as we all know, it's not necessarily something that those cows prioritize, but it is something that we absolutely prioritize as growers. So first question, or second thing, I guess, would be, what is she eating? So traditionally, we have grass pastures. These are pretty well balanced for calcium, phosphorus, but they do need a little extra of both in most cases. But we also have forages that are high in calcium, such as our alfalfa and our legumes, milk vetch, clover. We can also have weeds that come up, especially in drought, where we have the sweet clovers take over, the kochia takes over, and those have a lot of calcium in them. If we are salvaging crops or we have weed contamination of canola, peas, beans, pulses, that sort of thing, then they're going to be on a higher calcium ration. And also, if we are supplementing them with cereals or they're a salvage crop or there's a polycrop or something like that, which has a lot of cereals in it, it's going to have a lot more phosphorus, but it's going to be low on the calcium side of things. If we're feeding them stubble at the end of the year, that is going to be low in both calcium and phosphorus. So we're going to have to feed them correctly for what is actually out there for them to eat. So we talk a lot about ratios, and I know we have our own ratios that we use in our company. Lots of companies go off of ratios in the mineral, but that ratio is only part of the picture. We have to consider those forages that we're actually feeding them. So in the complete diet, we ideally like to see a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 calcium to 1 phosphorus. But that really doesn't tell the whole story. We can have a higher range. We can have much higher calcium, 6 or 7 parts to 1 part of phosphorus. So when I'm balancing a ration, if I see 6-to-1 ratio, I'm okay with that. I don't like to see much more than that. So on our pasture, of course, we have less control over this. But what I usually look at is the phosphorus requirement of that animal. So when they're on pasture, usually they're going to be lactating, and their requirements are 30 to 35 grams of phosphorus per day. And our first-time calvers can have a higher phosphorus requirement, especially if they're smaller, or they're milking a lot because they are still actively growing. They're still going to be accumulating a little more bone mass, and so their phosphorus may be a higher requirement. So the best time to invest in a higher phosphorus mineral would be in late gestation, because her intake is lower, her total intake, so her consumption of phosphorus is lower. So let's start ramping her up, getting her ready to calve, because when she calves, she's going to be making milk. That calf is also growing within her body. Phosphorus is a higher requirement in late gestation. And so I consider that phosphorus amount that she's eating a much higher priority than a 2-to-1 ratio. The next question, just keeping on the mineral side of things, is the salt. So salt usually is something that draws animals to the mineral. So for feeding free choice, we really need that mineral to be palatable, right? She needs to want to eat it because we're not force feeding it. And so we need to kind of gauge how much those animals are actually eating. You look at the TAG nutrients. If it's a salted mineral, you're going to throw that mineral out there, and that is what it is. So let's make sure she's eating what she's supposed to, which is it's going to say on the tag. Most of our minerals are 100 grams per head per day. A lot of companies are the same amount. But make sure you know how much they're supposed to actually be eating of that mineral. But if you buy, like we have a 2010 mineral, and I will not lie, it's not my favorite. You add salt to it, and you put it out. The feeding rate of that one is 50 grams of the mineral itself. But if you do 50-50 salt, all of a sudden, those minerals that are on that tag are worth half. So that 10% phosphorus is now 5. So now we expect her to eat 100 grams of that mineral, which is half salt, which I don't think is exactly achievable. But you do have to take that into consideration, is if you have a mineral that doesn't have salt, first of all, is there as much draw? And if you're diluting it, what is the end result of that mineral? So going back to the pasture, what else is she eating? Right now, if you have your animals out, this is the early growth. The potassium level in all of the forages is going to be high. Potassium starts out high and declines as it matures. So we may need some extra magnesium in that mineral when we start off the year, just to buffer any, it's not the magnesium amount that they're getting that might be the problem, but it's that potassium that's actually drawing the magnesium out. So they need more magnesium, potentially, depending on the forage that you're feeding. Grasses are safer, but especially if we have more legumes in there, there could be higher potassium content in the early forages. So you may need to feed more magnesium at the beginning of the year just to stop from any issues with those mineral imbalances. Then we come to the fall. The fall, the plants are growing dormant. If they're perennials or if they're cereals, they're dying off. And so they are still out there sitting in the elements. And as they are sitting there dying off, the vitamins are no longer being created, but they're actually decreasing as the weather basically wears them out. So they are going to be reducing as we get further and further into the season. Then there's drought. Drought causes a lot of plants to accumulate molybdenum. Molybdenum is a mineral. It is essential. We don't add it to any of our minerals because they get enough from their forages. But the problem with high molybdenum is that it can tie up copper. So we have, we like to say this general ratio of 6:1 copper to molybdenum. And when we have forages or pasture that's suffering from drought, we'll have higher molybdenum, making it a challenge for them to get enough copper. We also see that with boggy soils. And the other thing we have to consider is the water quality. Water, of course, they're drinking a whole lot out there while they're producing milk, right? 60 to 70 liters. And so we can have issues with the water causing reduced palatability. So when we have high manganese or high iron, we're going to have potential bad taste in the water. So they're not going to want to drink it. Then if we have high sodium in the water, that's going to cause problems because sodium is a part of salt. Salt is a driver in the mineral. If we have high sodium in there, guess what's going to happen to your mineral? They're not going to want to eat it. That draw from the salt will no longer be there. The other thing we have to look at is antagonists. So sulfates and iron both tie up other minerals. And we can have, in Saskatchewan especially, we have crazy amounts of sulfates in certain areas, and it is almost impossible to get animals to eat their mineral and get enough minerals to actually overcome those sulfates. So it becomes a real problem when you're feeding something that you think should be helping them. They're either not eating it or there's something in the water just causing them to be ineffective, not being able to be absorbed. So that water can literally break a mineral program. Here we have, this is from BCRC, Beef Research Council, and this is their website, beefresearch.ca. If you want to know anything about beef, I suggest going there because they have tons of information on there. But this is something that comes actually from the NRC. This is a nice little table that BCRC put together with it. And what I'm going to focus on is this copper. Or copper and requirement is 10 ppm for, this is lactating cows and pregnant cows. So keep that number in mind, 10 ppm. Manganese is 20 during lactation and 40 in pregnancy. And zinc is 30 and 30. And I could debate on these, but you know, they're the general requirements that the NRC has put out for what we look at, and we generally follow them. But the other things we have to consider is, what are our animals? The breed and their size. How much milk is she producing? If they are high milk producers, they are going to need more minerals for sure. What's her health status? If she has lots of health issues, it may be draining her of some trace minerals, and that can be a problem. And then we have these antagonists that I was talking about, the sulfates, the molybdenums, iron, that can exist in your feed and your water. So here I have some forages that were tested. These are hays, but essentially when you cut that forage, that is what the pasture is at that point in time. So we can use these as good references as what's in the pasture. So we have our alfalfas and our grass hay mixed. And so copper average is a little over 7 in our alfalfa hay. This is in ppm. ppm and milligrams per kilogram are the same amounts. So about 7 in our alfalfa hay, 5 in our grass hay. And if you remember, the requirement was 10. So then we have manganese. Manganese is a little better. We're closer to requirement. And grass hay can be quite a bit more, but there is a problem with manganese because when you have a lot of dirt contamination in your hay, that manganese value can be higher than it actually is in the forage. So little word of caution with that manganese value when you see it. And then there's zinc. When we're looking for 30, and we're definitely not achieving it with either of these. So when we look at minerals, this says mineral intake, and I wish it would actually say mineral absorption because I think that would be a much more accurate assessment. But if we have good mineral status, we are not going to see a whole lot of problems with regard to the mineral. But as we have lower mineral intake or status, we might see lingering issues such as like she's getting sick a little more, or you know, the herd just seems to go down a bit more. You might see problems with their growth or their fertility. Maybe you have more opens than you did last year. It's nothing that pinpoints an issue. Fertility can be, there's so many things that can affect fertility, but you know that there might be a problem going on, and what exactly is it? So that's a subclinical issue. And then we have clinical issues where there is a problem, you can see it, and you might be able to draw a line towards what the problem is. Okay, so if you have black cows, but they have a red hair coat, it's wiry, it's dull, it looks poor, there could be a copper deficiency. If your cows are dropping calves and they're getting broken bones or they have bone abnormalities, that might be a manganese deficiency. So something that is apparent. So Cheryl Waldner did this research here, and she took blood samples from many, many locations to determine the copper status of cows. And she found some definite hotspots where there is copper deficiency. We in this area right here might not be as deficient, but you tell me, because sometimes our research doesn't show. Perhaps we didn't get enough samples or they didn't come to certain areas. But at any rate, it shows that there are definitely copper deficient areas in Western Canada. Then she overlaid that with high molybdenum. So the molybdenum levels in their blood samples, there are definitely hot spots in certain areas. And if you look at the copper versus the molybdenum, there is definitely some overlap. It doesn't explain it in every region, but it does explain it in some regions. So because those two interplay, of course, there is that overlap. So we know trace mineral supplementation is required year-round, but the source is also important. So traditionally in minerals that we are formulating, we have used inorganic trace minerals. They were the first things available. And we built all of this research off of them, so the requirements, they're all based off of inorganic mineral intake, on top of whatever they're getting out of their forages. So inorganic minerals are things such as oxides, sulfates, chlorides, and hydroxies. Oxides and sulfates are the most common ones. And they're all absorbed through trace mineral pathways. Okay, so these pathways are not specific to a certain mineral. They all use the same ones. So the problem there is that there's competition. Okay, zinc and copper can use the same pathway, so they can compete against each other. And the other thing is that the compounds can, or they can be tied up with sulfates, as I explained earlier. So our trace minerals will be tied up with sulfates, molybdenum, iron, and that can be an issue. Just because of the form that these inorganic trace minerals are in, they can be interfered with by these compounds. And so adding more when you have a problem may not actually be the solution. If you have a problem with zinc, you want to add more zinc, you may unexpectedly cause a copper deficiency because they're going at the same site. And you've added more, now more is coming through, but the copper is being hindered at that point. So more is not always better. So we have organic or chelated trace minerals. In the industry, we use the terms interchangeably. So organic trace minerals are things such as complexes, like amino acid complexes. We have chelates, they're their own category. And proteinates, so it's a whole group of proteins that the trace mineral is attached to. We also have polysaccharides, so a group of sugars that these trace minerals could be attached to. And propionates, so small chain fatty acids. So with these, because they are attached to a different compound, the thing that works with them is that they can be absorbed with that compound into the body, as long as they're still attached to it. So that means that those antagonists, the sulfates, the molybdenum, they do not have a chance to get at that trace mineral in the gut. So they're absorbed differently, and the thing is we can use these when there are issues. So if you know you have poor water quality, or you have poor forages, you have something, fertility issues, or something that just seems to be hindering, and you want to improve performance, chelated or organic trace minerals are something that you can do to help their nutrition status. And then the flies. So there are two products out that we can use, Altosid and garlic. Altosid is a compound that we put in the feed. It is unavailable, they do not absorb it, it goes right into the manure. In the manure, it affects the larvae of the fly. And they test it specifically on hornfly, but I believe that it does work on other types of flies as well. So what happens is those flies will lay their eggs in the manure and no more flies will come out. So they're reducing the population. But those flies are still on the animal, they're still going to affect the animal, but we're going to locally reduce the population of those flies. So that's the advantage with that product. And then there's garlic. Garlic has less studies done. We've done field trials with it. We have testimonies from producers saying that they would never stop using it. It's an essential product for summer. And so it's basically a compound, and they excrete it out of their body, and it deters the flies. And so they're going to have less fly contact on them, but there's going to be just as many flies around them. So there's those two products that you can use if you know that those flies are definitely bothering your animals, and I don't know what animals they aren't bothering, because flies are obnoxious. So what if your mineral consumption is low? What can we do? First of all, the question I always ask is, what is the expected intake of that mineral? So if it's 100 grams, are we getting 100 grams? If you're putting a free choice mineral out there for your animals, and the feeding rate is 100 grams, that means on a 50 head cows, you're going to go through 5 kgs a day. Okay? So 5 kgs, a 20-pound bag should last 4 days. A 25 kg bag should last 5 days. I say 20 kgs is 4 days. So make sure that they're getting that consumption. When you first put them out on mineral, their intake might bounce around a little bit, but just give them a couple weeks to steady off their mineral intake. The next thing is, if they do not consume the mineral, is do they know how to use the feeders? If they don't know how to use the feeders, the ones with the flaps, they might just not figure out, or there's not enough of a draw to get them to be curious to lift that flap and get into the mineral. So maybe we have to give them a textured feed in there, that's something that they're really going to sniff out to get used to that mineral feed. I would suggest removing all of the salt sources other than the mineral if you're having mineral consumption issues. Because the mineral will have salt in it if you're mixing salt in, or if it's salt already. So if you have salt here and mineral there, those cows may be going only to the salt, or you have a lot more visitors to the salt than you do the mineral, and then you don't actually know who or how much the animals are actually getting of that mineral. We can place the mineral feeders closer to the water sources because they're going to go there, we know that, frequently. So take a drink, go over here and get some mineral just because I'm there, and I have not a lot to do, I'm bored. So that's a good place to put them, is where they're going to often be. If we have loafing areas, like if there's a tree stand or something that offers them some shelter or some shade, that might also be a good place to put a mineral feeder. If you have calf creep feeders, there's another place to put them. And then, if you find that the mineral feeders are quite busy, but they're not eating enough, it could be that they need more mineral feeders. We do say about 30 head per mineral feeder. Yeah. So if you have, 50, you probably should have 2 out there. If you have more than that, do the math. You should have enough mineral feeders to adequately feed all of those animals minerals and have enough space in between them so that they can actually get to them. Because you have those big boss cows that are going to push the others away. Yeah?
Do you have any research done with mineralizing cattle through force feeding with water supply?
With water supply?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Because I was reading about that, like they're force feeding it through water, like one day mineral water, next day fresh water, force feed to get in there, and once they've got the cattle mineralized, that they have no issue with flies anymore. Okay.
It could be. I don't know. I don't know how the setup would be for that. My curiosity would be what mineral sources they're using, making sure they're soluble, first of all, so they're not, drifting to the bottom. But yeah.
Like they're in like stock tanks, like troughs, right? So they put so much in a bag.
Yeah.
And then let them drink it one day, measure what they've consumed, done that.
Okay.
And then like after a few days, they've noticed like significantly that the flies have like pretty much vanished once they get that animal mineralized.
Was it allicin or it's garlic?
Just straight mineral. There's more mineral than just the allicin.
Okay.
Just getting the animal mineralized.
Yeah. Yeah, and so as long as it's the proper type of mineral, because I worry about it being soluble, right? So it's actually in the water, not just like a layer of dust at the bottom, right? So if that's something you would want to try, you would want to make sure that it's a mineral that's appropriate for that sort of feeding system. And lastly, test your water source. So if you're having mineral intake issues, we want to make sure that it isn't the water, because if it is the water, that's a problem, and that's a really hard problem to overcome. So I know I'm talking about minerals, but I have to say that if the mineral just isn't being consumed, there are other options. We do have molasses blocks that we can feed them. they're low moisture, which means that they should have reduced or like a minimal consumption level, just enough that they get the mineral that they need. And with these, we have, you can also get them with protein if they need a little boost of protein. So end of season is often when we see producers using protein blocks, the minerals or the molasses blocks with protein. And so basically saying what I've said is there's a nutritional gap between the forages and what cows require. Choosing the right mineral requires knowing what you have, and so figuring out what is on that pasture and what is in that water. And proper mineral intake is important. So, but it also matters what type of mineral you are feeding. And then we can also add that fly reduction products if that's something that you choose to have. So that's what I have. Any questions? Must have done a good job.
I have a question. So for the Alticid mineral, when do you want to start using that?
So I think Alticid, they say 30 days prior to pasture turnout. And garlic would be similar. I would say you want to get it at least 2 weeks prior to them being turned out. A little more is a little better. Yeah, but Alticid especially because they need to have like the full dose coming through their manure prior to going out into the field or the pasture.
Okay, are there any other questions for Rachel? Jewel?
I've seen them, your Alticid in blocks.
Hmm.
Is it in loose too?
No. So Cargill was the one that has it in the loose mineral, and they had the rights to it for 10 years. Now we all have the opportunity. However, I don't know that there's any other company that has loose mineral with Alticid. We have tried. Health Canada and CFI, we have to go through both of them because it is not a nutrient product. It's technically a pesticide, so it goes through Health Canada. There are so many things to go through, and we have not yet successfully met all their requirements. We're trying, but I feel like our only option would be to get something manufactured in the States to bring it up here as a loose mineral to offer our producers, because it's becoming more and more of a challenge to get that. But we do have it in the blocks, yeah.